Now, it's probably not news to you that American universities are hotbeds of some pretty crazy ideas. But my next guest makes a very good case that schools are not just full of mad ideas, they are driving their students mad as well. Glenn Reynolds is an author, a law professor at the University of Tennessee College of Law, and founder of the absolutely invaluable Instapundit blog, which, for my money, he's one of the best aggregators of news about politics and the current madness you can find. Now, he's written a brilliant column in the New York Post about an incident at Stanford University where conservative judge and Trump appointee Kyle Duncan was asked to speak and then predictably shouted down. Have a look.
So you've invited me to speak here, and I'm being heckled nonstop. And I'm just asking for an administrator to sign.
That's an administrator. Your racism is showing.
Glenn Reynolds joins me now. Professor Reynolds, first of all, tell me about this Kyle Duncan guy. Why was he so controversial, and why did his mere presence attract such hatred and anger on that campus?
Well, he's decided some written or joined some controversial opinions in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Texas and some other states in the south central parts of America, having to do with trans rights and abortion and things like that. But he was invited to speak and actually to talk about those and what drove those opinions, the sort of thing that people who want to be successful lawyers should want to learn regardless of what side they're going to take on these issues. It's generally considered a useful skill for lawyers to know how judges think so that you can persuade them. Instead, there were about 100 student protesters who came there and shouted him down. And indeed, before he even got there, they had put up posters with the pictures and names of the Federalist Society members who had invited him, shaming them in the hallways and threatening them. And we then have administrators from Stanford Law School sitting right there watching and doing nothing. And as your little clip showed, when Judge Duncan actually asked them to intervene so that he could be heard, because he was literally shouted down, you couldn't hear what he was saying, one of them instead got up and read a prepared speech endorsing the student protests.
Well, Professor, we've got a little bit of that.
He felt
We've got a little bit of that here. Let's have a look at some of what happened then when that administrator was asked to intervene. Roll the tape.
And I'm uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable to say this to you as a person. It's uncomfortable to say that for many people here, your work has caused harm. Has caused harm. And I know that must be uncomfortable to hear. I know that must be. Let me please finish. And I want to give you space to finish your remarks too, Judge Duncan. Is it worth the pain that this causes and the division that it causes? Do you have something so incredible important to say about Twitter and guns and COVID that is worth this impact on the division of these people who have sat next to each other for years, who are going through what is the battle of law school together so that they can go out into the world and be advocates. And this is the division that's caused.
Now, if I've got this straight, Professor, what we've got is the administrator at a law school telling law students that they should be scared of ideas that threaten them. Is that correct?
That's right, and that's kind of what we see in higher education in America now. The notion that ideas can be harmful, that words can be violence. And let me just say, anybody who thinks words are violence has never been punched in the mouth. But that's what they're told, and students have been fed this to the point where they believe it. They think even letting somebody speak with ideas they disagree with is a personal insult and an act of violence against them that justifies them defending themselves by shouting the person down and even using physical violence to shut them up. And we've seen that on a number of campuses. We saw it in Georgetown. We've seen it at Yale. We've seen it at Stanford. All the places that are supposed to be the incubators of our deepest legal minds of the future. And I think they're failing in that mission now.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a great line in your column where you quote a friend of yours that says, you know, anybody who thinks words are violence has never been punched in the face. And I think that that's a great reminder for absolutely everybody out there. But then the crazy thing, and this is really fascinating to me, it sounds like it got really, really Maoist. And the law school dean apologized to the judge, but then there was a kind of what looked like a big character poster campaign from the Cultural Revolution put up about the dean, criticizing them for going out and apologizing to the judge. I mean, this really does feel to me like what we saw during the Cultural Revolution, where the students took control of the campus to drive out any sort of bourgeois influences and basically shouted down and denounced everybody who were their opponents.
Yeah, but the students were backed by Chairman Mao, who's a pretty formidable guy. These students aren't backed by anybody except the spinelessness and moral cowardice of these administrators. When I was in law school, some students complained to one of the few old, crusty professors laughed about something or other he said, and he just said, "Oh, yeah, that might bother me if I cared what students think." And, that's the response. Another one of my professors said that students aren't the consumers of legal education. They are its products, and they have as much a right to an opinion about it as a Buick does about the assembly line. And I think that's...
Yeah, that's such a really important point there you make, because, you know, the whole consumer model of education that's really developed in the United States has totally inverted the equation of learning. But you also say in your column that this woke DEI approach to education that we see, where you pander to these students' names or need or emotional sort of vulnerabilities, is actually making the students more essentially crazy and vulnerable. Just walk us through how that works.
So, you know, this is actually something Jonathan Haidt said, who's a psychology student and an expert. And he said, look, when we do therapy on people, like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, we try to teach people not to ruminate on past experiences, not to engage in black and white thinking, not to engage in emotional reasoning. And DEI does exactly the opposite. Where we try to get people not to think that way so that they can be healthier, DEI says, oh, no, your past traumas, they define you. Black and white thinking is literally what we want from you, and your emotions completely trump any notions of logic and reason. You must run with them. And that makes people crazy, especially when you tell people your weaknesses give you the right to bully other people. And the more you do that, the more bullies you're going to have and the more weaknesses they're going to claim. The proper response to these Stanford students is say, remember how you sweated for the LSAT? Remember how you rounded up recommendations? Remember the essays you wrote so you could be here at Stanford Law School? You're about to flush all that. You're going to get expelled if you keep this up. That's the proper response.
And I mean, look, we see this happening sometimes here at Australian universities. This has not hit here as hard as it is going to, I fear, in coming years. But what is your message, you know, as a professor, as a lawyer, and as somebody who thinks deeply about these things, to parents and students and people in charge of education here in Australia? Because I think in some cases administrators are already starting to weaken on this stuff.
Adults need to stop being afraid to act like adults, and they need to be willing to insist that students act like adults. And law students in particular are going into a field where you can't be a successful advocate without dealing with opposing ideas. That's kind of the definition of the job. And you have to persuade people over whom you have no actual power, which means you have to use the force of your ideas to do so. You can't just shout them down. Stanford Law School is not teaching people how to do that. The value of a Stanford law degree in the minds of many people watching this is declining daily. And they have a brand that they should care more about protecting. But honestly, they're just too weak. They're just too weak. And they give these students a degree of moral authority that students do not, in fact, possess. They haven't earned it. They're not behaving in a way that suggests they deserve it. They need to be taught to act like adults. And you don't do that by giving people whatever they want. That doesn't work with 2-year-olds, and it doesn't work with 22-year-olds.
Professor Glenn Reynolds, thank you so much. Scary stuff when you think about these people going to be lawyers and even one day, God forbid, judges. Glenn Reynolds, thank you so much. Make sure to check out his website, instapundit.com.